So in today's video, I'm going to be going through every League 2 club and ranking what I think the expectation at that club will be for the 2024-25 campaign. If you do go on to enjoy today's video, please make sure to drop a like on there for me. If you could try and hit 150 likes on today's video, that'd be massively appreciated. Subscribe if you're new as well. We're now on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so please make sure you are subscribed if you haven't already with that post notification bell on. It's free to do so and it does massively help out. Get your thoughts in as well down in the comment section down below. Let me know down below what club do you support and where do you think you'll finish this season. What are the expectations at your team? Now I would like to clarify that these are the club's expectations and not the fans' expectations, because the fans' expectations always seem to be raised a little bit compared to where the club would actually be happy with them finishing this season. We have 5 categories. We've got avoid relegation, not fancy, challenge, playoffs and autos. Obviously a lot of them are self-explanatory, but not fancy will basically be any team between 18th and probably 12th, somewhere like that. Challenge will probably be that 11th to 8th sort of range where they'll just miss out and they might not quite have enough to get into the playoffs. And obviously the other 3 categories are very self-explanatory. So let's start out then with Barrow AFC. I'm going to put them in the not fancy category. They might have an outside chance of challenging, but I feel like with no Pete Wild there this season, the club will just be happy for a little bit of stability and see what life will really be like without Pete Wild, because it's been a number of years now since they've gone into a competitive full season without Pete Wild as their manager. AFC Wimbledon, I feel like the club again will be expecting them to challenge for the playoffs. Will they have enough to get in there? I'm not so sure. Again, the fans are probably expecting a playoff charge this season, but I think the club would be happy with an 8th, 9th, just missing out by a couple of points and looking to build in seasons to come. But AFC Wimbledon for me, I think challenge is the right category. Bromley Football Club, obviously they've started out the season very well, but I think the expectation at the start of the campaign would have just been to avoid relegation. I'm pretty sure it's their first ever season in the EFL, so obviously the first aim is to avoid relegation. I'm pretty sure that no club has ever been relegated in the first season, having been promoted from the National League into League 2, so I think avoiding relegation is a pretty realistic expectation. My team, Bradford City, I think the expectation is probably to finish in the playoffs. The fans obviously want to win the league. That should be the minimum expectation, but I think again, if we finish in the playoffs this season, that would be a positive season as far as how I see the club's comments. You know, Ryan Sparks obviously bragged quite a lot about how we got to the playoffs in the 22-23 season, saying, you know, that was kind of his defence to all the other seasons of poor finishes in League 2 when talking about there's no room for mediocrity. He was like, yeah, well, we got to the playoffs. We got knocked out in the semi-final. So I think the club, again, will be very happy with a playoff finish. Cheltenham Town up next then. I'm going to put them in the not fancy category. A couple of weeks ago, maybe even a month ago now, I'd have probably had them in avoid relegation. But Michael Flynn, I think, is a steady away League 2 manager. They've signed some steady away League 2 players, but obviously after the poor end to last season, they lost 99% of their squad. I think they'll just be happy for a season of consolidation. Carlisle United, I think the club will be looking for the playoffs this season, in my personal opinion. It's obviously not great to see Bradford, Carlisle and playoffs all in the same category. That's giving me very traumatic flashbacks, but do I think the expectation of the fans is probably playoffs? Potentially. I think a lot of people might be hoping that they'll finish in the top 3, but I think Paul Simpson might hold them back a little bit, in my opinion. The Piatek's obviously coming in. They'll definitely be looking to finish in the playoffs this season after being so poor last season, but they have decided to stick with Paul Simpson. There's still a couple players away, in my opinion, from challenging for the playoffs, but it's not been a terrible start to the campaign. Beat Barrow at the weekend as well in the local derby. Accrington Stanley, the way I see it, I think a season of avoiding relegation this year. They lost 3 or 4 of their best players from last campaign, the likes of Tommy Lee, Joe Pritchard, Jack Nolan, just to name a few. Their recruitment has been largely from the lower leagues, and I think this season, with a new manager-ish, technically, obviously the first full season without John Coleman, it'll be interesting to see how they do really get on, but I think they'll be happy with just a season of avoiding relegation. Gillingham Football Club, I'm going to put them in autos. I think the expectation is definitely to see them finish in the top 3. They're one of the biggest spenders in the league. They've got one of the better squads as well. Very good manager in Mark Bonner, and I feel like if Gillingham don't finish in the top 3 this season, it will probably be a little bit of an underachievement. So in my opinion, I think the expectation there is probably to finish in the top 3. Walsall FC is a very interesting one, because at the start of the transfer window, they would have all told you, you know, we have to finish in the playoffs this season, but based on their recruitment, based on their strike force as well at this moment in time, I'm struggling to see where the goals are coming from, and I feel like everyone's kind of accepting it's going to be another season of not really a lot going on for Walsall. I don't even think they'll have enough to challenge for the playoffs, especially with Jamil Matt and Josh Gordon leading the line. I don't think at the moment they're actually top of the league, and they beat Swindon 4-0 at the weekend. Albert Adoma, very good signing, but I feel like as the season eventually starts to kind of peter out towards the back end of the campaign, I think they'll probably be looking around 14th place, somewhere like that, just a guess off the top of my head. But before we do go any further with today's video, make sure to drop a like on there for me. We are aiming for 150 likes on today's video, and don't forget as well to subscribe to the channel if you are new. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers. Get your thoughts in as well down in the comment section down below. What is the expectation at your League 2 club from this season? And let's move on to team number 10. Next up then, we have Crewe Alexandra. Again, it's going to be another one of them seasons for me where Crewe have lost all their best players and they end up finishing in mid-table again. They might have enough to challenge. I think they might just squeeze top half of the table, but when you lose the likes of Rio Adebisi, Elliot Nevitt, the list goes on, for example, I feel like Crewe have a season of finishing in the playoffs, then a season of finishing like 16th, and the chop and change between them, and if obviously they get over the line and promoted into League 1, they still lose all the best players and usually end up getting relegated. But I think the expectation this season is probably to have a challenge of them playoff positions. Next up then, we have Chesterfield FC, and I feel like this is a bit of a difficult one. I'd probably put them right at the top of challenge, because say if Chesterfield finish 8th for their first full season back in League 2, I feel like a lot of people will be quite satisfied with that. Obviously it'd be frustrating just to miss out on the playoffs, and I could certainly see the argument for the expectation there to be the playoffs. I'm certainly open to changing that. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section down below. But for a first full season back in the AFL, they've not made loads of signings. The signings they have made have been very good, the likes of Paddy Madden, Shea Dunkley, Liam Gordon, just to name a few. But I feel like the expectation, if the expectation was to be to finish in the playoffs for a first full season, I think that would be quite high, and then you're putting a lot of pressure on Paul Cook at that point, and I don't really see him being sacked this season in my opinion. Next up then, we have Doncaster Rovers. Their obviously aim and expectation there is to win the title. Grant McCann said after their playoff semi-final defeat against Crewe, if you're a player who's not wanting to win the league with me next season, don't bother coming back. Obviously they had a really disappointing defeat against Newport the other day as well. They were obviously favourites to finish bottom of the table, but Doncaster, I think the expectation there is definitely to finish in the top 3. Lost a few of their key loanees in the summer. They've signed some decent players though as well. Billy Sharp has returned to the football club, so I'll be very surprised if the expectations were any less than to finish in the top 3 for Donny this season. Next up then, we move on to Fleetwood Town, and again they're a bit of an interesting one, because I feel like at the start of the summer I probably had them in not fancy, but I could potentially see them, their expectation now being to challenge for the playoffs, try and finish in that top half. They've signed very well. They already had some decent players from last season. They got a really disappointing last minute penalty given against them against Notts County. I watched the majority of that game. That was never a penalty in my opinion, but Fleetwood, I feel like the expectation there, based on how their summer transfer business has gone, I probably have them challenging in and around the playoffs. After that, we move on to Swindon Town, and again it's a bit of a tricky one because they've got a really good starting 11 on paper, but their squad depth is terrible, let's be honest, and obviously they got pumped 4-0 at the weekend at home to Walsall, who were not expected and tipped to do much this season, so few concerning signs there for me. I'd still expect them to be trying to challenge for the playoffs, and I feel like for a club as big as Swindon, they should be challenging for at least the playoffs. I feel like if I had them in between 18th and 12th, that I'd be doing them a little bit of disrespect in all honesty, and it looks weird seeing Swindon above Walsall after Walsall pumped them 4-0 away from home at the weekend, but I'm going to stick by that, and I think Swindon's expectation is probably to challenge for the playoffs. After that, we move on to Harrogate Town, and I feel like the expectation is probably to avoid relegation. You would expect them as a fan to be in the not fancy category, but I feel like for a club like Harrogate, the size of their club, the expectation would always be to avoid relegation. They have got some good players on paper, but they're very hot and cold. One week they'll beat Port Vale 3-0 at home, and then the next week they'll lose 4-0 away at Accrington. They're very hot and cold. I feel like they need a little bit more consistency, but as always with Harrogate, I do see their expectations this year to just be avoid relegation. Before we go any further though with today's video, don't forget to drop a like on there for me. We are aiming for 150 likes on today's video, and don't forget as well to subscribe to the channel if you are new. We are now on the road to 10,000 subscribers. Get your thoughts in down in the comment section down below. Let me know down below what is expectation at your League 2 club for this season, and let's move on to the final 9 teams. MK Dons are up next then, and I think the expectation is definitely to be automatically promoted this season. The way that they finished last campaign, very disappointing in the playoffs. They've not started out this season particularly well either, losing on the opening day live on Sky against Bradford City, and I don't think their game after that was too much better, to be fair. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but I see MK Dons' expectations this season definitely to finish in that top 3. You look at their recruitment as well. Yes, they've lost Max Dean, but away from that, their transfer window has been absolutely incredible. After that, we move on to Colchester United, and I think the expectation is probably to challenge for a playoff spot. I think if I had them in the playoffs, that'd be a little bit unrealistic considering how poor they have been over the last couple of seasons. You don't just change that mentality at the football club overnight. The Cowleys, though, they are cooking up something very nice there. They've signed very well. Jack Payne, the standout for me, in my opinion. I think they'll be top half, or the expectation is certainly to finish in the top half, but any higher than that I think would be a little bit unrealistic at this stage of their rebuild. After that, we move on to Grimsby Town. I'll probably put them in the not fancy category. They have got some decent players on paper, the likes of Charles Vernon, when he's on it, one of the best players in this division, but massively struggled with injuries last campaign. Will their fans stick with David Artell throughout the full season? I'm not entirely convinced, but they've got a good goal scorer in Danny Rose. I'm just not massively convinced by their defence. In all honesty, I do think at times they're going to struggle with the possession-based style, but for now I'm going to put Grimsby in that not fancy category. This Morecambe badge is about 10 years out of date at this point, it must be, but I think the expectation this year is definitely to avoid relegation. You look at where they were 3 weeks ago when they had about 4 senior players at the football club, and then they announced 15 players all at once. It was absolutely crazy. Their start to the season has been really poor. I think they've had 2 defeats, 2 1-0 defeats as well, which is a little bit concerning for them going into the remainder of the season. They're really struggling to score goals at the moment. I feel like a lot of people expected that going into this season based on the attackers that they did sign. They have got some good quality in there. The likes of Gwion Edwards, Leangle was okay under Mike Hughes a few seasons ago for Bradford City, but I do think they'll struggle a little bit this season, but I do still have them to hopefully avoid relegation. After that, we move on to Port Vale. I think there are a lot of people's title favourites, especially at this stage. They've started out the season absolutely brilliantly, and I'd be very concerned if the expectation based on the players they've signed, the managers they've got, not managers, the manager that they've got, if they weren't to at least finish in that top 3 this season. Again, obviously there's more than 3 teams who expectations are to be automatically promoted. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because there's only 3 positions for automatic promotion, only 3 teams can have the expectation of finishing there, if that does make sense. But they've signed unbelievably, got a very good squad, very good strength in depth as well, and I expect them to finish in the top 3 this season. Newport County, pretty much everyone has written them off, so the expectation surely has to be to avoid relegation. Hopefully do something similar to like what Crawley did last campaign. I'm pretty sure 99% of people will have Newport in the bottom 2, if not bottom of the table, so their expectation should definitely be to avoid relegation. Tranmere Rovers, I feel like the expectation is probably to challenge for the playoffs. I think that's largely down to their manager. Nigel Adkins obviously did a brilliant job there last campaign. I think when he went in, would they have finished 6th or 8th, somewhere like that in the table, if obviously the season started when he took over. The previous manager, Ian Dawes, was absolutely useless, but their recruitment hasn't particularly been amazing, signing the likes of Declan Drysdale from Newport. Really baffled by that signing. The way I look at it is if they weren't able to get in the playoffs with Rob Apter, I don't see how they get into the playoffs without Rob Apter now, especially with the league being a little bit stronger in terms of them playoff places. The Autos, I think, are a little bit weaker, if that makes sense, but all the teams fighting for the playoffs, I think, will be a little bit stronger this campaign. Salford City, I feel like are going down a different style and a different route this season, and I probably have them to be not fancy, not really special going on there. In all honesty, I feel like their recruitment hasn't massively stood out, apart from maybe Cole Stockton, the way they played a Bradford City at the weekend, time wasting from minute 1 almost. Happy with the 0-0 will tell you that they see that as a good point, which a lot of clubs would do, but I feel like for a team who would want to be challenging, they definitely go there and try and pick up the win. Final team on the list then is Notts County. I feel like the expectation is probably the playoffs. It would be Autos based on the squad, but Stuart Maynard hasn't really proved himself as a manager. They needed a last minute controversial penalty to get over the line, not even get over the line, nick a point at home to Fleetwood at the weekend, which is very concerning for me. Stuart Maynard, I don't think will last the full season as a manager, and there are what I think the expectations are at every League 2 club this season. In the avoid relegation category, we have Bromley, Accrington, Harrogate, Morecambe and Newport. In the not fancy category, we have Barrow, Cheltenham, Walsall, Grimsby and Salford. In the challenge category, we have Chesterfield, Wimbledon, Crewe, Fleetwood, Swindon, Colchester and Tranmere. In the playoffs category, we have Bradford, Carlisle and Notts County. And in the autos category, it, we have Gillingham, Doncaster, MK Dons and Port Vale. But I'm going to leave it there then for today's video. If you have enjoyed, please make sure to drop a like on there for me. If you could try and hit 150 likes, as I said at the start of today's video, that would be massively appreciated. Subscribe if you're new as well. We're on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so please make sure you are subscribed if you haven't already with that post notification bell on. It's free to do so and it does massively help out. Get your thoughts in as well down in the comment section down below. Let me know down below what club do you support and what is the expectation at your team for this season. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget as well to go subscribe to more SHD for even more football opinions and content. Have a great rest of your day though, and I'll see you very soon for another one. Peace.